There's no such thing as no man's land to me. Man just needs a place where he can be wild and free. 10,000 feet. Dr. Pepper 10, manly a slow-calorie soda in the history of mankind. Bold flavor.
Oh, Lord. Well, I hope you don't assume that what I'm about to talk about today is the worst advertising campaigns in history, because that certainly would be among the top 10. Um, yeah, we're going to talk about advertising, and actually, that example feeds perfectly into something we're going to discuss in a couple seconds. But first, let's just ponder what advertising is anyway. When I do think about advertising myself, one thing that always comes to mind is an initiative that's been talked about a time or two. Don't hear much about it anymore, and hopefully it goes away. I would say 10 or 15 years ago, you heard about it quite a bit, and that was an effort to ban cigarette advertising. Now, I am not a smoker. I don't have a kindly thought at all about cigarettes or the tobacco industry, but the idea of banning cigarette advertising is so specious, so beyond possibility, that I can't imagine any intelligent individual would ever suggest it. Now, why? I mean, what is advertising? I guess you could consider a cigarette itself to be advertising, right? It has a logo on the cigarette, it has the name of the cigarette on itself. So if someone is modeling the product, it's advertising. There's so many ways to advertise. I could ask each of you to give me 10 ways to advertise a cigarette or cigarettes, and you wouldn't even come close to exhausting the possibilities of how one could advertise cigarettes. Um, and even though, as we all realize, cigarette advertising has been banned from television for more than 40 years, you can't get away from cigarette advertising, and the industry has done quite well, obviously, in finding ways to get its message out to people. Um, Advertising is simply information, and in the information age, you cannot put a cork in that bottle. Uh, Now, as pertains to the internet age, we want to, of course, talk about probably the key theme in this class, and that is convergence. In your book, in fact, in the first few words of chapter 11, it discusses this in the fact that in 2010, for the first time, internet advertising surpassed newspaper advertising. I'm sure you're not surprised by that, but it's pretty significant to consider that newspapers, which of course employ internet advertising, have basically been shunted aside by what the internet represents to advertisers. And of course, the opportunities are unlimited, whether it's using Facebook or or Google or YouTube or just any means of doing it. And it's only going to increase. When Now we're not interested when we're discussing this concept or this subject. I'm not going to have you read some of the chapter which relates to how advertising agencies work. I doubt any of you is going to end up in an advertising agency, and some of you might choose a career that in advertising or something that relies on advertising. Well, that's for later. But everybody is influenced by advertising, and our society itself is very much a manifestation of so many of the images and symbols that come out of advertisers' fertile minds. So let's talk about a couple that are in the chapter, and I'm going to ask you to read about. Well, first off, let's talk about regulation. I think whatever the subject in mass media, we need to understand how government or society interacts with that subject. We talked about the FCC quite a bit. So what about regulation of advertising? Is that even legal? I mean, isn't advertising information, and how could the government regulate or control information? Well, it certainly can. It certainly does. And when it comes to advertising, the tool that's employed is the Federal Trade Commission. Um, I was very surprised to realize how old the Federal Trade Commission was. In fact, 100 years old. Yeah, 1914. I sort of have trouble understanding what it was doing way back then, but it certainly has a lot to do now. And one of its biggest functions is to curb false advertising. Yep, you can't just make any claim that you want about a product or commercial product. FTC will come and make you force or make you prove it. And we often hear of products that are taken off the market based on false claims or advertising campaigns that are altered because of that, because of the FTC. Um, Now, relative beyond that, let's talk about two interesting concepts from our chapter that really say a lot about the lives in which our existence is relative to advertising. The first is the association principle. This is something utilized in most advertising anymore. Once upon a time, advertising was very straightforward. You had a product, you had a name, you had a jingle, slogan, maybe a straightforward message about what it did. Something that cleaned your sink, something that cleared out your sinuses. Well, anymore, it's not just that. It's the association principle, which employs the use of symbolism, images, sometimes things that have nothing to do with the product whatsoever. I mean, let's just think of Budweiser, right? A straightforward appeal about Budweiser would be that it gives you a buzz, um, and tastes like hops and barley with a little alcohol thrown in there. However, based on the association principle, what do we associate Budweiser with? Little Dalmatians, or big hoofed horses, or yeah, a fire wagon being pulled by those horses in a snowy country setting. What does that have to do with beer? Nothing, but Budweiser is quite confident that it is money well spent to associate those images with the product. And have they succeeded? Absolutely. When I said Budweiser, you knew what I was talking about, right? The old slogan was Budweiser says it all. When you say Budweiser, you said it all. Now, if you say little Dalmatians on a fire truck being pulled by big hoofed horses, you've said Budweiser. Good job, Budweiser. Good job. How about this concept I want you to read about? The myth analysis. Um, I love the term myth in this case because not only does it apply to advertising of products, but it also applies to other forms of controlling people's moods and attitudes. Myth analysis is when advertisers establish a narrative that conveys the images, symbolisms, and such that they want. And I have to tell you that the Dr. Pepper tin commercial we just looked at certainly does that. Talk about a narrative. And this is part of a series of commercials um, in which this mountain man is, being a mountain man. Somehow Dr. Pepper tin factors into it. At least they show him drinking the drink. So that's, you know, um, that's more straightforward than some myth analysis. If you imagine, I mean, the I'm trying to think of a commercial campaign where you almost get no sense of the product. I think that would probably be a waste of money, but some of the most successful advertising campaigns have very little information about the product. The Geico campaign, very little information. It does say just one little bit about saving money, but by and large, what's happening with myth analysis is it's providing a captivating narrative and then also some branding attached so that when you think of insurance, car, home, and otherwise, you think of Geico. And I would say that Geico has succeeded immensely through the use of establishing a narrative, establishing uh, something that people identify with that product that doesn't really associate with the product. Now, let's see. Um, the reason Geico is so successful is it has managed to place its brand in your brain. And we know of so many others that have done exactly that. Now, there's an exercise in your chapter that I'm going to ask you to perform, and that is called the branded you. And that's where, and you'll see it in your chapter, that's where you're asked to look around and see all the branding that's going on in your home, in your workspace, uh, in your life. And it's immense. It's immense. I'm reminded of going to Europe about 25 years ago, stepping off the plane and rather rapidly realizing that I looked pretty weird. Why? Because I had a lot of logos on me. I had a logo on my ball cap. I had logos on my t-shirts. I didn't have any t-shirts without logos on. They're all freebies. But in Europe, certainly at the time, nobody wore logos on their clothing. Nothing at all. I looked very alien. And I'm sure people moved away from me as I walked through the crowd. But I'm sure that's changed now in Europe. I'm sure it's very much logoized, Americanized. Um, but look around and see how advertisers are using you as a vehicle to get across a message to somebody else. Well, that's just about it on this topic. I think I'm going to go have a Dr. Pepper, not a Dr. Pepper 10. I've never tried one. It may taste like tree bark as far as I know. But some of you manly men might want to try it. I'm sure you're just dying to right now. As far as you ladies go, I'm sorry, they really didn't have you as a target audience, and I hope you won't take offense. Until next time, let's read about advertising.